Shalom. This is Yehoshaphat Oliver coming to you on the 10th of May 2020, the 16th of Iyar, in the Hebrew calendar. And today I want to discuss the very painful and alarming development of the way the rabbis are conforming with the government measures and recommendations. So, what we're observing in the world is some of the most draconian measures ever to be enforced in the most draconian measures ever to be enforced in the Western world in modern times, in our lifetimes. This should cause alarm and skepticism of the government, of the explanations we've been given for these measures, and for this vast expansion of government power. Many people have not noticed, have not registered this dramatic takeover, this power grab of the government. They still believe the official narrative, including in the Jewish community and in the Orthodox Jewish community, and therefore they're willing to encourage and even enforce the government measures. Sometimes they do so with zeal and fanaticism, to the point of even reporting on other citizens and fellow Jews to the police, reporting them to the police, but daring to disobey the government edicts. And they're doing so misguidedly, but based on a fundamentally true principle. That principle is, I believe, being grossly misapplied in this case. And that's, of course, the basic principle in Jewish law of pikuach nefesh, of preservation of life. The mandate to preserve life overrides all other considerations in Jewish law. So therefore, based on a doctor's ruling, you can desecrate the Shabbos, the Shabbat, you can eat food on the holy fast of Yom Kippur, you can also desecrate the Shabbat based on the ruling of a security expert who says that you need to launch some kind of military operation. The principle is valid and fundamental that the mandate to preserve life overrides virtually all other considerations. But this is being applied, I believe, completely incorrectly in this case, in the case of COVID-19. During this crisis, what we're being led to believe is a pandemic. The rabbis are telling us that we must obey their instructions to obey the government health experts. And they're doing so in the name of Jewish law. Jewish law says that you should listen to the government health experts. That's what they tell us. Because we know that Jewish law says you should even violate Yom Kippur and Shabbos and so on, prohibitions that are normally extremely strict for the sake of health. So therefore you should listen to the government health experts. So this idea that pikuach nefesh, preservation of life, takes precedence over virtually all other considerations is not something we need an expert rabbi to tell us. Any school child is familiar with this principle. This is basic. The issue over here is not whether this principle is overriding, but whether it applies in this case. What is the exact threat assessment? Are we being told the truth about COVID-19? um, upon which experts should we rely? That is the issue. And I believe that the rabbis are not in any particularly exclusive position to pass an authoritative opinion on which experts we should rely upon. Each individual should make their own decision about that. They should be entitled to choose for themselves. That's not the business, with all due respect, in my opinion, of rabbis to be deciding that we should prefer the opinions of certain health experts, namely the government approved ones, over other health experts. Yes, safety and health are paramount priorities. But it's precisely because of that that bad actors, that corrupt people, can use the claim of coming to protect our safety and our health for control and manipulation of the people. We are being told to obey the public health experts, but it really doesn't take much time to research the topic of public health to find out that over the years, public health experts have told us all kinds of things that turned out to be completely mistaken. And not only did they make mistakes, but they deliberately lied to us on many occasions. Some examples of where we were given false or agenda-driven information were with regard to pesticides in the foods, vaccines, and firearms, and many other issues. Public health is related to politics. It's a part of the government. And therefore, just like any other area of the government, of politics, of the state, it's not about science and truth and objective information. It's about money, it's about power, about control. And these public health officials and organizations like the CDC and the FDA and the EPA and so on, and their counterparts in all other Western countries, they exist to a large part to promote propaganda. In particularly, in the medical industry is joined at the hip to Big Pharma. Big Pharma controls medical school, it controls medicines, and it does so with the goal of maximizing their profit. Their goal is not health, healing, and those who offer cheaper and more healthy alternatives to the expensive pharmaceuticals are often shamed and marginalized and deprived of their ability to practice as doctors and professionals, and sometimes they're even killed. It would be one thing if the rabbis were naive in their health decisions about their own personal lives. That's their own personal choice. But in this case, where they're imposing their naivete on the community, well, that's another thing entirely. They're not doing their due diligence when it comes to questioning the narrative that we're being told, to establishing that it is indeed true, which is what people are relying upon them to do. They're just automatically, unquestionably accepting the official narrative. And that should make us really concerned. In particular, when it comes to recent developments, the truth has been coming out that COVID-19 is no more dangerous than the flu, meaning it's not a pandemic at all. The numbers were padded, the government deliberately exaggerated the death toll worldwide. They've been giving immoral incentives to hospital administrations to falsely classify deaths from other causes as COVID-19 deaths. We've found out that the tests are utterly faulty. They don't even test for COVID-19. We've found out that the original mathematical model was grossly exaggerated and completely flawed from the outset. The model from the Imperial College of London that was used to justify the lockdowns. We've found out that the hospitals in New York are systematically murdering the patients brought in supposedly with COVID-19, and even many patients not even diagnosed in any way with COVID-19, but automatically assumed to be COVID-19, and therefore they suffer the same fate as the COVID-19 patients. Yet all these facts are being ignored by the lay leaders, by the rabbis. Why? Because they're being ignored by the governments. So this is it's surreal. It makes you want to scream. Seeing this dramatic discrepancy between the facts that are coming out and the response of our leaders, supposedly. Why are the government ignoring these developments? And why are the rabbis just as blind? For the most part, it's true that not all rabbis are like that. Some rabbis are questioning and so on, but even they should be speaking out. And we're not hearing that. We're not hearing that those voices of rabbis pointing out the dangerous implications of this expansion of the police state that we're observing. These are often the same rabbis who told us to obey the health experts with regard to vaccines, despite the numerous reports coming out that children suffered severe injuries from vaccines. But yet the government ignores that. They continue to tell us the lie that vaccines are safe and effective. And they continue to mandate the vaccines. And the rabbis push us to conform, not to try to find exemptions, homeschooling or what have you, to get out of administering the vaccines to one's children. So these rabbis who just automatically accept the government's word, they are the blind leading the blind. It's just astonishing. The truth is now so widespread. It's hard to think that this attachment to the official story is not willful. It's unpleasant to speculate on what this shameful compliance might be motivated by. It could be concern about their image. It could be designed for the schools and synagogues to be supported by wealthy patrons, benefactors, or to receive government funding to ease the financial burden on their institutions. But the explanation in any case, any particular case, is irrelevant. This phenomenon of blind acceptance of the official government narrative is shameful and terrifying. Now that the rabbis are blindly following the so-called government-approved health experts, and the sheeple are mostly blindly following the rabbis, we have a serious problem, and that is that this is a slippery slope. There's automatic conformity, all based on this constantly repeated argument from authority. The experts say, how could you dare disagree and consider otherwise from what you're told by the experts? all without even considering dissenting medical opinions, professors and researchers, blindly accepting the official narrative, all based on the presumption that when it comes to public health policy in our institutions, the government and only the government knows best, and therefore it must call the shots and be in total control. These people are not thinking clearly. They're obeying like robots, like zombies. They're not willing to consider anything that deviates from the official narrative. And in fact, they'll respond very aggressively if you dare to question the official narrative. Still today, they will. They certainly did a month ago, but that hasn't changed. The same people who were very zealous a month ago are, from what I observe, they're just as zealous now. They won't admit the truth, that they were sold a lie. They don't want to backtrack and admit that they were fooled. They're not willing to listen to any argument presenting reason and evidence and to adjust their opinions accordingly. They automatically dismiss anyone questioning the official narrative as a nutcase. They're viewing the official narrative as a religious dogma, all while they fail to stand up for our human and our religious rights. They say we need to keep the shuls closed because opening might endanger lives. We're going to save lives, we're going to protect lives. But are they so careful about protecting lives when it comes to other dangers which aren't officially endorsed? What if we were to approach these lay leaders and rabbis and ask them to take action about the Wi-Fi in the schools and in the synagogues? How would they respond then? They would give you a funny look. They would dismiss your concerns. If you would say that the documented harms of vaccines, which the government classifies as an unavoidably unsafe product, this should mean that parents should be entitled to choose whether to have their children vaccinated, not be forced to do so, or otherwise have their children deprived of receiving a Jewish education. How would they respond to that? On the whole, they dismissed that. What if you would come to them and point out the 5G cell phone towers that have been set up, all while been stuck in lockdown and looking the other way? They've been set up in our neighborhoods, in our public places near our synagogues and our schools. What about the documented dangers and harms from radio frequency radiation caused by the 5G cell phone towers? If you point that out, they will dismiss that concern. Why? Because it's not officially a problem. So really, the claim that we should listen to the health experts is disingenuous. What's really going on here is blind obedience to the government, not to real health experts. In particular, recently on the 7th of May, Rabbi Moshe Hauer of the Orthodox Union, the OU, interviewed Fauci, and then a statement of policy for the entire organization, all the synagogues that are under the auspices of the OU was crafted. And this statement followed Anthony Fauci's words completely, including his recommendation that the Orthodox community implement contact tracing technology. And this was followed on the 8th of May by the Sydney Beth Din, releasing a statement calling on the community to download the Australian voluntary COVID-safe so-called contact tracing app. What did they say? Invest in COVID detection, tracing, contact, and resultant isolation play an indispensable role in containing the disease. That is why the government has introduced a COVID safe app. Right, so they're completely endorsing the government agenda to track us, all for the sake of health. While the use of the app is voluntary, and there is discussion in the community as to the extent of its efficacy, the Beth Din, together with the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies Committee and the ECAJ, strongly recommends its use, and the rabbis of the Beth Din will be using it. However, as the benefit is remote and not immediate, and Shabbat observance by its nature limits contacts, carrying one's mobile phone on Shabbat is not permitted. However, individuals should be vigilant in general, even with the app, and in terms of Shabbat, record contacts made for longer than 15 minutes after Shabbat. In most cases, this will be just family. So, yeah, you should allow yourself to be tracked, your every movement to be recorded by the government. You can trust the government. Everything will be fine. It's all for our best interest. This clearly should remind anyone who's gone through the high school system in Western countries of the dystopian novel of 1984 by George Orwell, where he warns about the evil that can take place when government seizes absolute power. In particular, 1984 warns about the all-pervasive surveillance state, which in our times is fast becoming a reality. And this so-called contact tracing technology is exactly what Orwell was warning us about. It's totally Orwellian. To have the government track your every move and record everyone you come into contact with, then arrest you or imprison you, quarantine you, just because you came into contact with someone who tested positive for COVID-19 based on a test that's faulty? What does rabbis have the business in endorsing these police state measures? If anything, they should be speaking out against it. Certainly not endorsing it. These statements by these rabbis supporting this contact tracing technology should send shivers down our spines. It should alarm us, make our hair stand on end. Every deprivation of freedom so far is being accepted by this leadership. It's all being justified in the name of safety, and it's in total denial of the fact that COVID-19 has been proven to not even be a pandemic. The danger is minimal. It's not greater than that of the seasonal flu. What is a pandemic? Pandemic is defined by huge numbers of people dying all over the place, getting severely ill. Well, there are not these huge numbers. That hasn't happened. It didn't happen. All that happened was that the small numbers of people who allegedly got COVID-19 were blown up in the media and shoved in our faces constantly in order to cause fear and compliance. Fear-based mind control. But if you actually look at the figures, they don't show what they claim to show, a pandemic. There is no pandemic. It's nothing but a scam, a total scam. It's a big lie with a capital B and a capital L. And we have to look to the future. If the rabbis are conforming with every single measure so far, then where will it end? What will be when the rabbis and the lay leaders demand that people take antibody tests and other tests, blood tests, saliva tests, before being allowed to return to the schools, the rabbinical colleges, and the synagogues? What'll be when these rabbis and lay leaders demand that people take temperature tests before being allowed into these public places? What will be when these rabbis and lay leaders demand that people take a vaccine before being allowed to return to these public places? And what will be when they demand that people allow themselves to be microchipped before being allowed to return to these public places? And I'll take it even further, and a very unpleasant question, but I think we really need to consider it. What will be if the rabbis and the lay leaders are told by the government that everyone must be evacuated to an undisclosed location because there's certain areas infected by the disease? They've all been infected and therefore they have to be evacuated. They have to get on buses en masse. Will the rabbis and the lay leaders tell the people to comply and get on the buses? These rabbis, these leaders are in denial, just like the vast majority of the members of the community. Ignore all these people. They are acting like robots, like zombies. They're not acting like leaders. Leaders are given a greater voice and an influence so that they use that voice to lead. That's their responsibility. And in this case, they have failed us. It should be obvious, but I'll say it anyway, because I believe it needs to be emphasized. The only medical experts who we can view as reliable and authoritative are those who are independent of government. Not that they're perfect, but they at least stand a chance of getting it right, of giving us their honest and pure opinion on matters of health and prevention of sickness. What is really going on over here is not a virus and a pandemic, but rather an unprecedented power grab. We're being robbed of our rights and our freedoms, and with this attitude, those rights and freedoms will never ever come back. Our civil liberties as citizens of Western democracies will not return, nor will our religious freedoms to gather and pray freely. By freely, I mean without being subjected to a temperature test, without being demanded to have a certificate of immunity or a certificate of having received a vaccine or a microchip. Those do not count. Any restrictions on our prayer do not count as freedom. Freedom means no conditions attached to going to the synagogue and praying. And if there are those people who are worried about catching the disease, they can stay home, they can temperature test themselves, they can choose to get this untested vaccine that will be released. They can choose to get the microchip, but they shouldn't impose their paranoia on other people who are skeptical of the official narrative. Everyone is entitled to make their own choices, take their chances, with regard to this supposed threat. We need to be able to say no. And these leaders need to be able to say no. No to contact tracing. No to mandatory testing. No to any testing, because these tests are not in any way reliable. No to vaccine mandates. No to anything that inhibits our freedoms. We need these leaders, supposed leaders, to support us and lead us. If they choose to be so blind that they would rather fall right into this devious trap, then we must reject them as our leaders. If you're a rabbi or some lay leader, please consider the words of the critics. Consider the irrational and excessive enforcement of the lockdowns that we're observing, the deployment of drones, of tanks of the National Guard, the signs of upcoming mandatory vaccination. Don't these things alarm you? Think about the lessons that we should be learning from history and the dangers of a rapid introduction of tyranny through deception. The reason we study history is so that we can learn its lessons and apply those lessons in modern times. We should never think we're immune from the ills that beset past generations. And if you're a congregant, please approach your rabbi and bring the words of these critics to his attention. Let's hope he takes you seriously. If not, then go to other congregants and try to share this knowledge with them and ask them to approach the rabbi as well. If all this fails, then sorry to say, but you need to find a new congregation and a new rabbi. The best thing would be to start a breakaway prayer group, a breakaway minyan. If you're watching this presentation and you're a Christian, then the same goes for you. Approach your pastor, approach your priest and your fellow congregants, and share this knowledge with them, educate them about what's really going on if they are still accepting the official narrative. We should all be able to tell that this is not about a virus. It's just so obvious. The government tyranny is intensifying on the one hand, and yet at the same time, the death toll is extremely low. Clearly, this alleged virus is a pretext for this worldwide power grab. If leaders have any value, whether religious or lay leaders, if leaders were ever needed, it would be to speak out against this grave, rapidly growing threat to the freedom of all mankind. Even if, despite all the proof coming out that the numbers are exaggerated, these rabbis still consider the virus a serious threat, and therefore they're speaking out about the importance of following various measures, why can't they at least also see the danger from this government power grab is just as serious, if not vastly more so? If these rabbis can call for caution against the virus, why can't they also come out against these draconian government restrictions and mandates? Where will it end? If they support contact tracing, will they now support a vaccine? Will they be silent about it? Or will they speak out against it? Exactly how many freedoms will they enthusiastically support us losing in the name of obeying the apparently infallible public health experts? In reality, no rabbi or lay leader should be promoting any measures at all, because we now know clearly that COVID-19 is a lie. It's been proven. There is no pandemic. There never was a pandemic. It's obvious. Why wouldn't the government admit that? Because it created and promoted this deception all along. It was a big scamdemic, plandemic. But we should not allow ourselves to be played for fools. We should resist. And no matter how respectable someone might otherwise be, if he willfully ignores this deception, he is complicit in enabling it. And again, not all rabbis are like that. But whoever it may be, whichever respected leader it may be, it doesn't matter. He should be held accountable for supporting these draconian measures, and he should be expected to speak out against them. So don't obey these rabbis telling us to use contact tracing and so on. Use your critical thinking skills. Obey your conscience. Obey common sense. Thanks so much for listening. God bless. Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel. When tyranny becomes law, resistance becomes duty.